you can introduce this new book that's just out.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone, particularly also on the West Coast. I know it's incredibly early, so thank you for making that extra effort to get up in the morning. Really appreciate that. I have the pleasure to be chatting with you this morning or this afternoon if you're in Europe. Janusz kindly invited me to talk about Guardrails. It's a book that Princeton University Press published just last month that I co-authored with Urs Gasser. Urs Gasser now runs a school of public policy and technology at the Technical University in Munich, which is the leading technical university in Germany. And he was, before that, he was for a decade heading the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard on the internet and internet regulation. I am from the Oxford Internet Institute. I'm one of the statutory professors there and have been for over a decade. And I've been looking over the last 25 years on the internet regulation, but mostly with a focus over the last 20 years on information and data. And that is actually a good lead in. I think my own trajectory, my career trajectory kind of follows or foreshadows, I don't know who came first, what Guardrail does. In a way, just think about it in the early 2000s and the late 1990s, for those of us who are old enough to remember, we talked a lot about infrastructure governance. Who owns the routers? Who owns the domain name system? Who is in charge of ICANN? And these were the very hot topics. I remember people got really worked up on these issues, and they are important. But as I think we proceeded to become more digital and to do even more online than ever before, I think our kind of focus shifted away from infrastructure governance, from thinking about who governs, who runs, who rules, who has power over infrastructure, to questions of who has and controls information flows, who has access to and controls data. And that has a lot to do, I think, both with the explosion of content providers, social media in the late noughts, but most importantly also with what we now call artificial intelligence, but what 10 years ago or 12 years ago was called big data, basically amassing a lot of data and doing analysis on it, either through some form of machine learning or through less sophisticated but still also quite interesting statistical analysis on these large data sets. And as we did that, we realized, oh gosh, those that have a lot of data have a lot of power. If you think about what in the United States, the Federal Trade Commission has been investigating, what the Antitrust Division at the Department of Justice has been investigating, what the Attorney Generals, the state levels, have been investigating. Those are the GAFAs, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Apples of this world, who have amassed so much data and have control over a mechanism that enables an ingestion of data at significant proportions. And that amount of data then often translates into power. And so we started talking about data governance and information governance and these kind of issues. And when you look at, the Digital Markets Act in the European Union, this is not entirely, but almost entirely on data governance and who has the power to utilize data. Do we let others have access to data and these type of things? And I have been in the midst of these debates, and it was fun. But when big data and AI, particularly Gen AI, over the last couple of years came to the forefront, one of my co-authors, Ken Kuki, and who had done a book together with me called Big Data about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And we started looking at this and we started saying, oh gosh, this is a shift. There is another focus shift occurring. And we are moving away from just sort of data governance issues to really something that can only be described as decision governance. We are now using more and more technical tools to help us make good decisions, whatever good means in this context. A good fit for the aim and the goals that we have, or the context that we're in, the preferences, and so forth. But if you look at Gen AI in a way, this is a lot about decision support, decision guidance, helping us make good decisions. And Ken and I said, geez, but how is that decision process actually happening, and what is Gen AI doing to that? And we started writing a book together with a decision scientist, Francis de Vericourt, some years ago, to focus on the role of humans in the decision process. And as we dug deeper and deeper, of course, you can imagine this becomes a pretty quickly quite an interesting deep, dark black hole, because these decision processes, we have shed some light over the past decades. Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, famous, got the Nobel Prize, but later on, a number of other people like Richard Thaler and others followed, and really showed that human decision-making is flawed, is biased, has biases baked into them. And so the technologists, but not just the technologists in Silicon Valley, said, well, if the humans are so bad, even more reason to let the machine take over and guide us, take us down that pathway. Yeah, we may still be in the loop, but in the loop means, we essentially press the button that the machine suggests we should press. And a lot of people have come up with all kinds of scenarios of how we should see or sketch out the role of humans and the role of the machine. But at the end of the day, if you think about your ABS braking system in your car, that's a machine that makes decisions for you, essentially. And you don't question them very much anymore. At least I don't. If my car is skidding over an icy road and the ABS braking system takes over, I'm just glad it does, because otherwise I would be, or most likely, in an accident. And so we did a book called Framers on what the human role is in all of this, and it's sort of working with mental models and imagining decision options that the machine can't imagine. And Framers was quite a success, I dare to say, and the Financial Times called it one of the books of the year and so forth. And we were really unarmored and said, now we know what the role of humans is. And then my friend Urs turned around and said, but what's the role of the machine? And how do we sort of provide guidance for what to use, what for to use the machine and what not? And then Urs and I started writing guardrails, or thinking about guardrails. And we really very quickly realized that AI is just the latest in a long history of decision guidance mechanisms, if you want. Social norms, laws have been guidance systems for decision making for a long time. Prohibiting advertisements for cigarettes is done in order to make people to smoke less, that is, to decide more often not to smoke than to smoke. Or consumer protection laws in many countries enable people to reverse their decisions. because if they might have made a bad decision purchasing something that they really don't need, then they can reverse it and sort of cancel the contract later on. That's another way of, a social norm or a law coming in and saying, we guide you in reversing a stupid decision that you made, and that goes all the way to, ABS systems in cars, which help us make decisions, and then finally to what we now talk a lot about, Gen AI systems. And the question then is, if we have these decision guidance mechanisms in place, what kind of mechanisms would we want? Well, what are good mechanisms and what are bad mechanisms? And the quick answer, to sort of these mechanisms is to say, oh, we need privacy protection, we need to stop discrimination and biases in decisions and so forth. But Urs and I believe that this is far too short-sighted. It's the problem is bigger than sort of the quick solutions that we already know indicate. Now, if I may say, this is a very human challenge that we face. When we humans have a tool set of solutions, we see a lot of problems that our solutions seem to solve, even though the problems are different, or the problems require new tools to solve. If you have a hammer, you see a lot of nails suddenly that you want to hammer in, and so we argue in Guardrails that's the wrong approach, and that we need to think about more conceptual design principles on how to design these guardrails that sort of guide human decision making. And before I stop, I'd like to introduce you to the 4 design principles that we came up with. The first design, I'm already giving up and giving away all the eggs. Janos is happy. Yeah. So the first principle is, whatever guardrail you put in place, it's better to put a guardrail in place that empowers and enables individual decision making, rather than taking the individual decision away from the individual person and delegating it to some other institution, machine, whatever, a process. I can go into details for obvious reasons on why this is the case, and I hope we will have this discussion. But for now, I'm just sort of stating the 4 principles, if I may. So the first one is empower the individual decision maker. The second one is understand whatever guardrail you come up with, the decision guideline, the decision guardrail that you put in place will always also have effects and consequences for society, not just for the individual. So it needs to be deeply anchored, deeply rooted in society, in the social, because no decision stands alone in a sort of vacuum, except if you are one of those philosophers that live alone on an island and then come up with hypotheticals. And the third principle is perhaps the most important principle of the 4, and that is the guardrail should enable human learning in decision making, so that we over time become better in making individual decisions, but also as society become better in the decision making process. This has to do with the fact that humanity only achieved the kind of progress it did because of cultural learning from each other. And if we can't learn from each other, can't learn from the mistakes that we make in decision making, then in fact we cannot harness the power of cultural learning. And the fourth design principle is one that I like best, and that is self-restraint. That is, whatever guardrails, whatever guidelines you come up with, you need to know that the guidelines will not be perfect, and that they need to be repeatedly revised, changed, adapted as we begin to understand more about what we are doing. The worst kind of laws, the worst kind of rules, the worst kind of machines are the ones that are hard-coded and cannot be changed or are not changing over time, because then these systems are not adaptable to any change in the context and the preferences in the reality in which the decision is being made. So individually empowering, socially anchored, enabling learning, and deeply self-restrained are the 4 design principles. And if we use those 4 design principles to come up with good rules to combine, but also enable, for example, artificial intelligence decision guidance, then I think we'll have made some progress. Stop here. Talked way too much, but I hope I have given a little bit of an overview of what the arc of the book is and the book is all about.
You have. Thank you very much, Viktor. That was great. It's always fun and insightful to go into these conversations and not knowing whether the intro is 30 seconds or more like 19 minutes. But this was super insightful. I already pretty much filled my piece of paper here with handwritten notes. I wouldn't say we're done, but we still have some more time. As always in these calls, if anybody has questions, comments, you can type in the chat or use the raise hand feature. I have the book here. I haven't read it all yet, but let me just jump to our Swiss friend Martin, who has a question, and then we can do Copenhagen afterwards. Martin, you go first.
Thank you, Viktor. Really nice seeing you. I have one question on these 4 principles. What about the design principle of transparency? Is that also an important topic, or is transparency? Yeah. What about that?
Yeah. To Urs and me, transparency is kind of a precondition to some of those principles, or should I say precondition? Actually, wrote the wrong word. A means to achieve some of those principles. So, for example, if you think about learning, learning can only take place if you know what mistakes others have made. You need to be transparent about it. Spotify is actually so good as an organization because it learns really well. It has a fail wall, a famous fail wall where the founders of Spotify said, if we failed with something, it was very costly. So we need to reap some benefits of it. So the teams that failed with some initiatives need to put it on a piece of paper and put it on the fail wall that others in the organization can actually learn from it. Some of the problems that we have in science is that science journals only publish successful experiments. That's terrible. I think we need journals that publish experiments that went wrong by just, basically confirming the null hypothesis, so that we begin to learn from each other. As we all know, and as entrepreneurs know better, I was an entrepreneur in my earlier life. I learned far more from failures than from successes. I still don't know when I was successful, why I was successful. I once ran a workshop with Silicon Valley people, and we asked them, why is Silicon Valley successful? And they said, we don't know, and we don't know. Because we don't know why it is successful, we can't change anything in the Silicon Valley because it might be that one thing that made us successful. And so they said we became extremely conservative in our thinking, which is kind of anti-innovation and anti-learning. And so all that boils down to the fact, Martin, that we need transparency in order to enable learning, but it's a means to a goal of one of those 4 principles.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's great. And then let's move to our friend Guy in Copenhagen.
Hello.
Hi, Guy.
Thanks, Viktor. Yeah, I'm just thinking about a definition of guardrail and the ongoing discussion about on children and whether they should be managed or not. From our childhood where we were roaming free on the street and in the forest to now maybe where we've been driving being driven everywhere and being managed and controlled. And it's a sort of there's pros and cons. So my question is more, do you see guardrails as something cultural and norm-based, or more sort of like a physical hindrance to doing something? My analogy would be, you know, there's do you know the term sleeping policeman on a road?
Yes,
so to prevent a driver driving, you have a sleeping policeman.
Yes.
I don't know why it's called that. So you destroy yourself or your car if you go too fast. Alternatively, you have a driving culture where you interpret the surroundings and the context in which you're driving, and of course slow down yourself. Personally, I believe sleeping policeman is the wrong way to go because it's a physical hindrance. So it doesn't actually teach you as a driver to understand your context. You drive as fast as you can until someone's preventing you from doing so. So yeah, it's how do we decide which type of guardrails to put in place? Should they be like physical or cultural? Maybe my question.
Yes.
Big question, maybe.
No. I think
you see the difference there between the
I think guardrails applies to both of what you said. So there is sort of physical guardrails like the sleeping policeman, and there is social norms. The importance, though, is that, and for us, the importance is that people always should have the opportunity to make a decision, even by opposing what the guideline says, to sort of make the odd choice if you want. Now, even with a sleeping policeman, you can make the odd choice, and that is to speed over. You might wreck your car or not, depending on how you do it, but you can at least theoretically do it. I am even more concerned with what used to be the smart car, in Germany, those small two-seater cars that had a chip in there that stopped you from going above 130 kilometers an hour, even though you could, because then the designers felt it became unstable. The car became unstable. That, to me, is a bad idea, because you take the decision power away from the individual. And that violates the first design principle, empowering individual decision making. Now, on the spectrum of how far you should go to push an individual in a particular direction, how much you should nudge or not nudge, I tend personally to be towards less nudges, or less clear, less harsh nudges. But I understand that there is a spectrum of guardrails possible. And so when I think about guardrails, for example, I don't think about the steel barrier on the side of the road, even though you can also push against that steel barrier and go off the road. You still have that choice, but it wrecks your car most of the time. But I think more like a guiding rope up Mount Everest, a fixed rope that you can clip into, and that will protect you. But at any point in time, you can unclip if you want to and do it yourself. I'm a rock climber myself, and I try to stay clipped for obvious reasons most of the time. But if need be, I can unclip. And that is the kind of decisional empowerment of individual decision makers that I think is encapsulated in the first design principle. And my huge worry is that as we have more Gen AI decision guidance systems in place, the human might still be formally in the loop. We might still be pushing the ultimate button. But if the machine is correct in 99.9% of the time, people will stop thinking about it. People will stop questioning the machine. They will just press the button. And then the human being in the loop isn't in the loop anymore. The human being is just the automata pressing the button when the stimulus comes. That I worry about. I worry about deeply, because then we unlearn our ability to make decisions. And if I may add, airline pilots from Asian airlines were forced, when they flew across the Pacific, to land on US airports automatically with Autoland, so that it would all be smooth. Until a few years ago, when the Autoland mechanism was in maintenance mode in San Francisco, and a Korean airliner came in and they didn't know how to land anymore because they never had to make the decision anymore, right? They had unlearned that capability, and they crashed on landing and killed a person in the accident. So keeping the human in the loop requires more than just pressing the button. It requires us to also be enabled to make the wrong decision if we want to.
So, Viktor, there's more on the chat. We're running out of time. I think in the conversation we have heard something that's been both theory and practice.
I think Janos dropped out, or is this just my end? Oh.
This book, you said. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, now we can.
Yeah, Janos, now we can, but you dropped out, so you might want to repeat what you said.
Yeah, I'll just say that in the conversation, we've heard a wonderful mix of theory and practice, right?
Thank you. Thank you. The book has lots of examples in there, lots of horror stories of decisions going wrong, some with airplanes, but many more. And then of course we also list ways to overcome that. There's chapters devoted on how to create mechanisms that are representative of good guardrails.
Perfect. Sorry, we couldn't answer all the questions in the chat, but for me, this was exactly what I was fishing for, Viktor. Also, I know that many of the call are much more well educated than me, but still buying a book from Princeton by an Oxford professor could be a little bit scary, but I think you just said it, that it's not an it's a really good mixture.
Thank you so much, and feel free to email me. I do respond.
Very good. I'll make sure to summarize this. I'll have fun doing it. Looks like I'll fall into a few rabbit holes. That's what I predict along the way. But thank you very much, Viktor. Really appreciate you finding the time. We'll stay in touch and keep this conversation going.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.